Arlan Hamilton wrote a book called It's About Time. Arlan's an entrepreneur. Arlan is a thinker.
Years ago, Arlan Hamilton was sleeping on the floor of an airport and living on food stamps. Today, she is making waves in the white male-dominated world of venture capital.
I said I'm going to invest in 100 companies by 2020. It wasn't a question or a hope. I'm going to.
It was a fact.
It was a fact, yeah. Hashtag a fact.
Hey everybody, it's Deborah Carter here from PreparationTech. Today I have the most awesome interview lined up. I'm speaking with Arlan Hamilton, who is the founder and leader of Backstage Capital, which is a very special venture capital firm specializing in providing funding to underrepresented groups. So, and it was really cool how I discovered Arlan. I was doing research on how a minority, for example, a Black person would get funding for their venture. And her name came up, top of the search results, Backstage Capital. So I'm super excited you're here, Arlan. Welcome. Just explain to us what it is you do and how it intersects with technology.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me too, and I appreciate that. And it's fantastic to know that Backstage Capital came up very early in your results. That's what we're working towards. I have founded and I'm the managing partner of a boutique venture fund today called Backstage Capital, boutique meaning small, but it's growing. And we set out to shake things up in Silicon Valley and beyond and challenge the status quo and challenge what is default and traditional and what all these words mean in quotes. And so in the past 5+ years, we have invested more than $10 million, raised more than $13 million, and invested in more than 150 companies, led by what we call underestimated founders, who are underrepresented, yes, and certainly underestimated. People of color, women, and LGBTQ.
Awesome. So your story of starting Backstage Capital is just so inspirational. Can you tell it to us in your own words? Take us back right to the beginning.
Sure. So I am 40 now, and I grew up in Dallas, Texas, after I was born in Mississippi, where my mom was raised. We moved to Dallas, grew up there, and then once I graduated high school, I was always in gifted classes and a good student, but I had a hard time with always challenging things back then too. So I was always kicked out of classes and always getting into it with teachers and everything. But it really was just a curious mind. It really was was not being challenged enough. And so I didn't end up going to college just because I didn't want 4 more years of what I thought would be the same old. And I just went out into the world, spent a lot of years finding myself, not really having much money. But I did a few things that were very entrepreneurial in that time. So in my 20s and 30s, I started a music magazine from scratch because I wanted to have something that I didn't see out there. I started a touring company where I would tour as a production coordinator and then a road manager eventually for what started with indie artists, so garage bands or singer-songwriters, and what grew into arena level artists around the world. And there's a pattern that you'll see. One is that I was perpetually broke. I never could make ends meet really with it. Another was that I was always going for the moonshot, always going for what other people felt was like incredible risk, but also just couldn't necessarily relate to. Like you're running away with the circus basically. But the other thing that I think is like the biggest takeaway is that I would find something that was missing. And if I didn't see, if I wanted it to exist in the world, but it didn't exist already, I would find a way to create it or build it or ask for it. And so that's what I did with my career. And so I found myself in my early 30s on the road and really excited about that. But then I was really curious about this whole startup world because I had heard so much about it, little pockets here and there. And then I started hearing more about not only starting companies, but certain people starting making these investments. And so I wanted to understand what all of the fuss was about. So I just, poured into books and learned everything I possibly could. And I fell in love with the whole world of technology and startup world and being your own, like taking control of your own destiny and working with small groups to do big, huge things that reached globally. And I was very excited about it. I wanted to start a company in that world. But I learned really quickly that both anecdotally and also just through stats, that 90% of funding in that world goes to white men. And as a black woman, it immediately gave me pause, and it did a lot of things. It pissed me off, it angered me, it confused me, it saddened me, but it didn't deter me. And what I said was, okay, so these are the facts, let me lay them out. 90% of funding goes to everybody, goes to less than 10% of funding goes to anybody who's a white man in this country. What if there were a fund that did the opposite? And so I spent the last decade first researching and then executing on that thesis.
Awesome. So if, say, somebody watching this is a young Black startup founder, take us through the process. How would they approach you? What would you be looking for? Give them kind of some tips on how to be successful.
Yeah, so we at Backstage, we have a team, and members of our team can make decisions. And most times we come together and make decisions, and sometimes we make autonomous decisions. But it's not all predicated on my opinion or my taste. In fact, since day one, it's been very important to us that we have an open application process, or a way for you to have an instant warm introduction, because that's one of the things that makes that ridiculous stat true, is that a lot of times investors make it so that you have to have what is called a warm introduction, meaning you have to know somebody who knows them in order to meet them. And that just obviously sets up all kinds of problems with installation. So you've always been able to reach out to us. Now you can go to BackstageCapital.com, which is our website. You can see all about us, see about the companies we've invested in, and you can apply if you feel like you're ready to make that application. You can also start with office hours that we do, free office hours that we do. We try to do them once a month, maybe 9 or 10 times a year. And it's where the whole team gets together, the whole investment team gets together and answers questions in a group setting, and really helps people feel like they're prepared to take the next step to really apply. And so there's an open application process. We invest in about 20 or 30 companies a year. That's historically, which is a lot for a venture fund. Usually they invest in maybe 5 to 8 companies a year. But we see so much. And so we invest in about 2% of what we see. So understanding that we invest in only 2% of what we see, understanding there's a lot of competition, understanding that it's just our opinion, and so our no should not be the end for you. I would say then go to BackstageCapital.com, reach out, read about us. I mean, we are everywhere. We have a book out called It's About Damn Time. That talks a lot about what we look for. We have hundreds and hundreds of hours of content to make it really easy to understand what we're looking for, to see if you like what you're hearing, because you want to establish a relationship with your potential investor that might be years long. And so just looking for someone who can write a check is no longer enough. So we try to be as transparent as possible. And then individually, we're looking for different things. I personally am today at 40 looking for things that are life-changing, that are really moonshot ideas, that are really big, and not just ideas, but things that are in market, things that you have worked on. At least if they're not in market, at least you have a prototype. You've done something with nothing. In a lot of cases, that gets my attention. What doesn't get my attention is someone saying that they haven't really gotten anywhere because they don't have any money. Because I didn't have any money, and that can't be an excuse with so much competition. So there are a lot of ways. Other people on the team have other tastes and have other verticals that they're very interested in. Another thing that I offer is I have an online academy that I'm very excited about, and I know that probably is interesting to this group of people, being students. So if you go to arlanwashere.teachable.com, you'll see not only myself teaching a lot of courses, but other experts teaching courses. And it's a very, very diverse group of experts. And that was very important to us. So these things can help you with building blocks to starting your company or building and expanding your company.
Great. Is this free? Are these online courses free?
No, most of them are paid, but it's extremely, extremely accessible.
Yeah, great.
This is very important to me. So what I've done is you can buy things individually, or you can buy a tuition, lifetime tuition, or a monthly tuition. So it's very accessible today, and we have over 6,000 students because of that.
Fantastic. Now, back to your question of the kinds of companies that you invest in. Are there particular types of companies in terms of the tech that they're doing? What's hot right now for tech? What are you looking at? Like nanotechnology, ed tech?
Yeah, so for me, I don't look at trends. I couldn't tell you what's hot and what's not. I mean, I can read a book and I can read some, some jargon, but I'm not going to necessarily keep up with it because none of it to me really matters if it's not something that I can wake up passionate about. We are an agnostic fund, meaning that we will invest in almost any industry in any region almost as well, which has made it possible for us to cast this wide net, see things that we might have never thought of seeing because we don't keep it so verticalized. Now, we over the years have, each of us who make investment decisions have developed different tastes. So for me, I'm going to look at things that are I like, for instance, things that really make quality of life for people who are 65 older much better, including their entrepreneurial spirit, not just their caretaking. So something like that is very specific that I will look at a little bit closer because that means that, it's something that personally I'll have a lot of fun with. But, what we get a lot of, it does really run the gamut, but we get a lot of fintech because you have a lot of founders who are underrepresented, underestimated, who are trying to make a better land than what they landed on. And so that's fintech, that's a lot of healthcare. There's a lot of deep tech too. There's a lot of deep technologies. Yes, absolutely. We're probably 50-50 consumer to enterprise. So I wouldn't let that stop you there, and I wouldn't make an assumption there. We do get a lot of beauty projects and products. And I would say kind of overexposed to that, but at the same time, that's a good problem to have because it means we can source the best. It also means there's a lot of competition. So if you come to us with beauty and consumer, really have some sort of edge that sets you apart. And we have a company that is sending satellites into space for telecom. We have a lot of sustainability products and services that are very exciting to me, and that's another thing that is on my radar, is something that is going to help this world we live in, this spinning rock we're on, because hey, we may not be able to, but we got to try. We have to try, and I have another 60 years to try my best.
Amen. Amen. I'm sitting here, I'm listening to you. You're so passionate, so focused, so full of conviction. Where did you come from? Tell us about your childhood. Take us back. How did Arlan Hamilton get to be Arlan Hamilton?
Well, I mentioned that I was born in Mississippi and my mother spent a lot of time there. So she was born and raised there. And I actually just in the last few weeks got to see for the first time in my life a couple of newspaper cutouts that my mom was mentioned in back in the 60s when she was in high school. And it was because she was one of the few students, Black students, who received a National Merit Scholarship. That was a nationwide scholarship. They gave her a scholarship into any school she wanted to go to. And just seeing that, and she's so humble in many ways. In some ways she's not, but in many ways she's humble about that. And I just think, as far as I can remember, my mom instilled in me this idea of treating people fairly, treating people. Her thing was, I remember this as a very young child, her thing was people start with 100 points and they have to lose it rather than they have to earn the 100 points. And, whether you agree with that or not, I think that's just such a lovely way of thinking of things as someone who is a Black woman who grew up in Jackson, Mississippi in the 50s and 60s. For her to be able to even have that sort of grace, to me, was an influence. not just in what she said, but in how and knowing her background. So I think it's ultimately the biggest influence I had. I was a pretty odd child, I would say, but delightfully so. I wore 6 watches when I was in the 3rd grade because I discovered time zones, and I was obsessed with the idea that it could be 5 o'clock p.m. in Dallas, and it could be 5 a.m. in another part of the country, another part of the world, and it blew my mind. And so I wanted to know what time it was somewhere else. I've always felt like a global citizen, and I've always felt like someone where those boundaries didn't really mean much to me, where we were born and who we are. So I think a lot of that was there, but I was also an overweight Black gay child with gap teeth. So I definitely had my share of bullying and seeing the world and without the rose-colored glasses. So I think it's a combination. Those two things in equal measure kind of made me very very realistic, but at the same time, I have these moonshot ideas every single day of my life, and I just think about how can I accomplish some of those and how can I catalyze others to do the same.
And it seems like you have a mindset that you won't let people's ideas about underestimating you get in the way. You're just going to go right over them. My question to you is, what is the mindset and what are the personal characteristics that we have to start cultivating in children, specifically Black children, to make them successful in the future?
I would just say, this is what I try to do with my nieces and nephews, and they're all going to become teenagers at the same time in a couple of years. But just since early days, just letting them know what I was taught, which was there's no one better than you, and there's no one less than you. It's just as simple as that. So I really remember, that whole thing of whether it's the CEO or the person taking out the trash, it's the same. And so I think that instills a lot of confidence to know that, and also not to take it so far where you think that you deserve more room in this space than anybody else because you don't want to overcorrect. Although I will say that I do think that Black women in particular should have a little bit of entitlement. Because we have a lot of room and a lot of time to make up for it. But children, because Black children, at least my generation and behind that, didn't have the Superman and the Batman and this man to grow up looking at as these superheroes, like white children and white men especially had. I do think it's important that we are able to point to them to those role models and people that they can we're all human and flawed, and so you take the good what you can find, but I think that's important too, and hopefully being that ourselves if we want to be. I mean, it's hard for me to say, it's hard for me to be too much on a high horse about being a role model, but I do think it starts there. And then I love the fact that media more and more is going to play a role in what next generations and so on are going to see in themselves, even on commercials. I've noticed even in the last, in a post George Floyd world, commercials are even more representative than they were a year ago. And so that does really make a difference to a child who does watch television. They see themselves reflected, and it's almost as if the fact that it's not paid attention to is almost the big story.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think I was just also watching your documentary that you guys issued, and I mean, you're working with people like Mark Andreessen, I guess is the pronunciation. I mean, it's amazing. How do you feel when you walk into a room and you see all these people?
Same way I felt when my mom told me about the CEO and the person taking out the trash, and that's how I feel about me and anybody else. I mean, people have asked me very specifically with Mark Andreessen, like, how do you talk to him? I'm like, or Mark Cuban. I have a $6 million fund with Mark Cuban, and I talk to him every week. And people are like, how do you talk to him without being intimidated or nervous? And I'm like, he's just a person. He's a great person. I think he's a really interesting person, a very smart person. and he has his flaws, and we get into arguments, and as do I. But that's it. Like I care for him the same as I care for anybody in the world, equally. And so I don't know exactly where it comes from, because my mom says it doesn't come from her. She said that when I was like 4 or 5, I'd walk into stores and tell everybody what they're supposed to be doing, and So I don't know why, but I just don't think that anybody's better or worse than me. So that's easy for me to have a conversation with everybody.
That is a skill. That is a mindset that you definitely need. So I've got 2 more questions. The first one is, what can parents and schools be doing to prepare kids for a future in technology and business? Are schools doing enough? Yeah, especially schools. But
Yeah, I have to say, if I'm being honest with you, I don't know enough about what schools are doing these days. And also, I'm not an expert on even getting into tech. And so I think of somebody like an Erica Joy, who's a friend of mine. I bet she would have a great answer for this, because I'm sure she has her finger on the pulse. I don't know. I just know that the schools I went to, they were always well funded. I was always, we were always the kind of poor kids at the school, but they would always over index on sports, in my opinion, and less on art and less on science. And I think that, let's not get carried away. I think we should have that should be even. I don't know how exactly that plays out, but that's important, because there are a lot more engineers, salespeople, marketing people, project managers are going to be needed over the next 30 years than they're going to be NFL players. And so just really focusing on a balance there.
Mhm, mhm. My last question, and this is, how do you want to be remembered in history? How do you want the Black community to remember you? This interview is going to go into a Black History Month interview series, and I'd really like you to talk about that.
Hmm. I hope they remember me the same way they think of me while I'm alive, which I hope is that they know that I am they, and also they know that I'm doing this for them, and that I was a catalyst for so much that you can't measure by the end of the day. That's the hope. I'm over indexing on Black people. I'm over indexing on myself and on the power to catalyze other people's hopes, dreams, and aspirations.
I think that's a beautiful way to end the interview. Arlan, thank you so much for your time, your insights, your energy, and I wish you all the very best.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I appreciate you.